I wanted to welcome everybody to our technology special interest group for the Mid-New Jersey ATD chapter. Our technology special interest group has typically dealt with computer type of issues, being technology oriented, but the more I talk with our speaker, Dr. James Lehman, I realize that this is for sure a technical subject. And it's the kind of thing where you really need to have your ducks in a row before you enter any information into a computer system. You need to know how to ask questions, how to do it correctly. And so the more we talked about it, the more I thought it's appropriate to bring that on here. So that's what we're going to cover today, is essentials of question writing and review. Because if you get it right, then you can put it onto the computer, and then you know that you have a good product. And I'm sure that for those of you who ask questions in the chat, that's great. I will keep track of that, and we'll get those questions answered. We'll definitely have time at the end of the session for people to ask questions as well. But other than that, we're good to, I did want to make one more I guess kind of a commercial for our chapter, is that for those of you who have registered for this, then you know that our chapter address, midnewjerseyatd.org. If you haven't checked this out completely, make sure when you get to that landing page, you look at the other offerings we have. The session we have coming up tomorrow, we have a lot of people, but that session is going to be great because it's about checking out meeting software, so you could be interested in that. The event coming up next week already has 100 people in it, so it may have maxed out, which is a really great problem to have. We enjoy that. So the other thing that we can mention is come back to our site and check us out, because we have regional webinars, and we will be introducing more information into the future. In fact, our next month's technology special interest group is about chatbots, and we have Alexander Salas on that. He is a well-known national expert in that. He's done a lot of sessions on them. And so if you want to learn how to implement a chatbot, he's going to show you how to do that, and you don't need to be a programmer. So commercials aside, I'll turn everything over to
So, essentials of question writing and reviewing. Got about 30 slides for you here today, and we'll cover mainly writing question stems, how to write a good stem, and negatively and positively worded stems, and different varieties there. And then not going to spend much time on answer choices. That's another whole thing. Having the answer choices, plausible distractors, and the answer key, and equal length answers, and that kind of thing. I'll leave that for another time perhaps. So let's move on to the next slide. There we go. Just a little bit of an agenda for today. A writing review process, the STEM, and then as Jeff just said, we've got a couple of breakout exercises for you to noodle over for a few minutes. An unfocused STEM and a negative stem. If those don't make any sense to you right now, it's fine. I'll be saying what is intended there. We'll you'll have plenty of time to relate to that. So let's start with the basics. What's the purpose of an assessment?
Yeah, hey Jim, hang on a minute. We've got our poll first.
Oops, I'm sorry. That's right.
That's okay.
And we get to look at the results too, don't we?
All right, it's telling me that my polling session is inactive. You're logged in from an... That's not a good message. Oliver, can you run that poll? Because it's stopping me.
So it came up on my screen.
Did it?
Yeah.
Okay. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, there's 4 questions and then a submit tab at the bottom.
Right.
And you can scroll down too. for?
Okay, yeah, we got poll started.
All right, cool.
It may take a minute or two to get to different machines.
All right. I'm not going to answer, Jeff, because I would skew the results. I think
Yeah.
in some way it would be just wouldn't be right.
But sorry, I don't see the poll, so I don't know when it's going to end. But I would say okay, I'll ask Oliver to end the poll.
Oh, look at that. There's the results. Can you see the results, Jeff?
I can't see him. That's funny.
Okay.
Go ahead. What did it turn
Yeah,
out?
I'll just run through real quick. Today, I have no experience with tests and quizzes, and only 12% said yes, 88% said no. 2, I have written some test or quiz or test questions. 82% have done that. I have edited questions written by others, and we had 82% saying yes on that, 18% saying no. Question number 4, I have project managed a test. About half, 53% said yes, 47% no. And lastly, I have project managed multiple tests, and 41% saying yes and 59% saying no. So most folks here have had some pretty serious contact with tests and quizzes, so that's great. It also means you've probably worked with subject matter experts and have been around the block writing questions. And my experience, having done this for a while, off and on in my career, is writing good multiple choice test questions is not easy. I've always found it to be challenging, and so it's takes some time and effort, in my experience. Shall we continue on then, Jeff?
Go ahead.
All right. So the purpose of an assessment: demonstrate specific knowledge, skills from training, and distinguish between learners who earn a passing score and those who do not, if you have a passing score set. And we'll do reliability and validity in just a second. There's it's likely the case, and you all can comment on this if you want, that I call them higher stakes assessments, where there's something behind the score. If you pass and something good happens, and if you don't pass, you need to remediate or something. Higher stakes testing will tend to get a little bit more effort. Where a casual quiz, you're writing 5 or 10 questions for a little training program, it's going to be less of a deal. So we all want to do the best we can, but the higher stakes types of training are probably going to get the resources to do more things with writing questions and dealing with things like reliability and validity. The reliability here, just real quick, is does your exam, does your test yield consistent scores? That is, if it were possible to test people at 2 different time periods, where in the second time period they still remembered their training, but they did not remember the questions that they already saw, but could take the test a second time. Would we get similar scores in both of those testing administrations? And a reliable test will give you the same score on multiple testings, and that's a very important thing to have, and that's kind of a prerequisite to validity. And there, as it says, their validity, assessments measure specific skills and knowledge that are intended from the training, and it's also affected by question quality. I would add on to that, to validity, just by also saying it's a validity issue also, in the sense that we want the questions that we write for an exam to adequately the domain of knowledge that's in your training program. Your subject matter experts should help you do that using something called a blueprint. You've probably encountered this, or test specifications. There's more on that in a little bit, but that's another way of understanding what the validity here is our test really doing a good job of asking about the domain of knowledge and sampling it in a good way. We've all had the experience in high school or college or last week of taking a test after a series of lectures or after a training program, taking a test and finding some questions that was like, I don't think we covered that at all. I mean, I've had that experience, and I bet probably most of you have as well. And that's kind of a validity issue. We want our tests to very, as well as possible, sample the domain of knowledge that's at stake. Using a blueprint helps us do that. As test makers, test constructors, we've got to have a blueprint to work from, and that's a list of content areas, important knowledge, also called competencies. In education, K-12 testing, for example, they tend to call these competencies, but either way, you need to have a blueprint. Well, what's a blueprint? We work with subject matter experts, and not only do they write questions, but we want to rely on them at the beginning of the project to help us write a set of test specifications to make a blueprint that's a list of different content areas. You know, we have this competency and this competency and this one and this one and this one. And then it will also say the relative emphasis that each competency deserves to have. Do we want to ask one question on worm gears used in conveyor belt systems, or do we need 3 questions or 2? So your SMEs, of course, help do that. So it's very much the sense of a blueprint used in architecture. Only here it's for laying out the content areas that we're going to cover and some other things. And it's important to stick to that too. And when we're putting on our question writer hat, to always be able to think, okay, I'm writing this question right now. Where in the blueprint does this go? Yes, that's right. It needs to go right here. And keep in mind what the blueprint has, and make sure that the questions we're writing or coaching others to write are going to fit into our blueprint. And contributes to the validity, because again, our subject matter experts have helped us define the domain of knowledge and helped us make the blueprint. And so one of the assumptions of the blueprint is it's doing this good job of tapping in the domain of knowledge, and that's going to give us a valid test because it's going to cover everything that's important. So in your role as reviewing questions, and some folks said in the poll at the top that they had reviewed questions that others have written. A fair percentage of you indicated that you had. And of course, a good thing to do with that, as I'm just saying, is to make sure that all the questions you're looking at follow the blueprint. That sounds, maybe it sounds simple, but if you've got 100 questions that 10 people have written for you, that's a lot of questions to look at. So that it might take a little time to do that as you go through your questions. And another couple of important points here, all questions must be relevant to the purpose of the test. Again, I'll be writing stuff that's important, that's in our blueprint, that's one of our competencies, that's a major point, and avoid questions that have trivial content, because it doesn't tell you much about what the test taker knows then if it's trivial content, and where we may be wasting their time. Here's an example of a question with trivial content from my days working at PricewaterhouseCoopers. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act contains how many titles? 10, 11, 12, 13. And the keyed answer there with the asterisk is 11. Why is that trivial? Well, I mean, that's not really what Sarbanes-Oxley was about. And those of you that remember that era, was a big deal in accounting and firms, and having to restructure their accounting system sometimes, and there's really a lot to it. And knowing that there's 11 titles, that sounds more like Trivial Pursuit than it does, I think, a fairly serious exam where you're learning about the act and what are the important things. Here's an improved example. And just as a quick aside, we'll be doing this with most of our major points here today on this slideshow, is showing a flawed version of an item that has a flaw in it, and then an improved example. So here's an improved example for Sarbanes-Oxley. I'll just give you a minute to read through that. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's pretty long, but I think you'll see it's a little better. Again, our asterisk there is on answer choice D. Cost of capital is reduced since the likelihood and magnitude of internal control deficiencies is decreased as a result of compliance. So firms have reduced their risk a little bit by having being more compliant with their internal control deficiencies. So if those of you with an accounting background, I know very little about it. You've got to know a little bit about Sarbanes-Oxley to really find the correct answer here, rather than, oh, there's 11 acts in the act like we saw in the flawed version just a second ago. So what are the types of knowledge that can be tested in a question? And just another aside here, one of the raps you'll hear against multiple choice tests is it's too hard to test higher level cognitive knowledge. And I've got a couple of slides here. This gets at that a little bit, and another couple of ones too, that I think make a pretty good case that you can get to higher order cognitive skills with multiple choice. It takes more work. It might take a little more time to write such questions with a fact pattern or a scenario or something, but it can be done. So what are the different kinds of knowledge? We can test the theory. Maybe we have somebody solve a problem, or recall information. That's the basic easier one, the recall of information. And a completed blueprint shows how to balance. That's true, and I think a better blueprint does indicate that, not just saying here are the topics that are going to be tested and how many questions, but it also has something to say about the type of knowledge. Do we test in a theory here? And do we want somebody to show that they can solve a problem using the information from a given, that's part of a given competency? And so that level of detail is not always present, but it's a good way to build a really solid test by thinking that through, again, appealing to your subject matter experts and say, okay, Mr. So-and-so, you said that this topic X here is in the blueprint. Is it just a recall of information? Should we use it to test a theory or solve a problem? And if you can incorporate that into your blueprint, then I think it makes for a little bit better test. Any questions coming in so far, Jeff, or am I talking so fast that people don't have a chance to formulate a question?
Questions right now.
Okay, all right. Then let's move on to the next slide. This is a good thing to keep in mind when we're writing questions or reviewing questions. What's the learner's task in responding? Are we asking them to just recall information? Are they answering a fact pattern question versus a non-fact pattern? And as we have alluded to, it's easier to write declarative knowledge or recall knowledge, testing questions, than procedural or problem solving. And you obviously need some of those too, but again, to get to the idea of higher order thinking skills and higher cognitive levels, using fact patterns and scenarios is a good way to do that. Here's some strategies to increase the level of cognitive processing. We're making comparisons between two or more features, common links and principles, explaining facts that are given in the question, and relating ideas and relationships between concepts. There's another one that I like that I'll mention real briefly here. This takes more time, but if you have what's called paired passages, say you have a short a fairly short paragraph and a second short paragraph, both on the same topic, but from different perspectives. One takes this view or this bias, and the other paragraph takes another point of view or another perspective on the same topic. And then you ask questions of the test taker that require them to be able to compare and contrast and understand the differences that have been expressed. Again, this takes more time to prepare something, but you really can get a little bit of a window on somebody's higher level understanding when you have them compare and contrast two different points of view. Okay, challenges in writing questions. Which of the following types of questions is generally more difficult to write? Anybody want to volunteer?
Okay, got one vote for D.
Okay, and I've got the answer indicated there.
Yeah,
so
I got it marked. Yeah,
it should have not indicated the expected answer there, but problem solving. Those other ones, as we've said, at least with the declarative knowledge, I haven't talked about vocabulary much, but problem solving, it does tend to be a little bit more involved and take a little bit more time to write. If we're ready, moving on to constructing the question stem. Is at the core. We'll go over some common problems in drafting stems and how to correct them. And let's just say a little bit about the multiple choice item format. It's got a stem, which is the question to be answered, or the incomplete statement to be completed, the keyed option, which is the correct answer or best answer of those listed, and the distractors, which should be incorrect but plausible parallel options. In my experience, it's especially if it's like a four option or 5 option items, your experts know what the key is. It really can be hard to write those distractors. They should be incorrect but plausible. And it seems like writing 1 or 2 good distractors is not too hard. And it seems like that last distractor gets a lot of item writers, gives them a little trouble. Like, I just can't think of one more good plausible distractor. One of the helpful ways of doing that is to, if knowing the field, then to think, well, what are the common misconceptions that folks have about this particular area, and can that be one of those misconceptions or a couple of them be incorporated into your item as a distractor, and that can be a helpful approach to take. But it's hard. Writing good distractors is not easy. So you don't want to make a super fine distinction between the distractors and the key, and you don't want to make it too easy so that the distractors are implausible or humorous or something else. So there's a line to walk there, and it can be challenging to write good distractors. So here's a sample of a multiple choice question, and this is a long stem, but it's a fact pattern, and Chris has a debt to the bank, and I'll let you just read through that, and then I'll make some comments. So the keyed response or correct response is indicated there in choice A, $1,500. We're not going to get into calculating interest rates or proportions or percentages here, but this is a pretty decent example of a fact pattern question. How many sentences is this? 1, 2, it's only 3 sentences, so it's not real long. We're not putting a big reading load on our test takers, taking a lot of time. But there's enough there that we can ask somebody to apply some principles based on that. And it's, A pretty clear question. What was the initial amount of the debt Chris owed to the bank? Okay, I think I know what I'm being asked there. And that was the 4-choice question. And 4 and 5-choice multiple choice questions are still predominant format. I just was looking at an article the other day that I had seen before on multiple choice questions with 3 choices. That's the key and 2 distractors or 2 incorrect answers. And this was a research article looking at some of the psychometric properties and some other issues. And they were basically saying 3 answer choices is still good. It's nearly or the same or nearly the same as a 4 or 5 choice multiple choice question. And so they were defending that do that to be able to do that. You don't see 3 options very often, but it's a reasonable way to go. And like I was just saying, the difficulty in writing distractors. Well, if you only have 3 answer choices, you only have to think of 2 good distractors instead of 3 or 4. So it reduces the load a little bit on your folks that are writing the questions. And we perform the question format rather than completion. Completions are okay, but questions are just a little bit more clear, and so that's a little bit preferable. But you may want to have some variety or have something that's really more easily a completion. It's not a crime. It's not bad. It's just a little bit better to ask it as a question if you can. So here's a completion version. Largest city in China by population is all those 3. The key answer is Shanghai. So I can just looking at the STEM, I know what I'm being asked. Let's look at the other version of it, the question format. Here it says, which of the following is the largest city in China by population? And then the same answer choices. So I think that's a little bit more clear, just a little bit sharper than the other kind. It's not a huge difference, but I do favor the question format, and I think that's a little bit better way to go if you can, generally speaking.
Some of the comments from the chat are relating to the fact that if you have only 3 questions, then your ability to guess it changes the guess rate from 33% to 25%. So
yes,
that's why they're favoring having 4 choices rather than 3.
Yeah, that probably wins the day for a lot of people. It's easier to guess a 3 option question than a 4 or 5, but there is empirical research on this. It's I don't know if it's in the resources or not, but it makes a small difference, not as big as you might think. And of course, the chance of guessing correctly, that's guessing at random. If you just close your eyes and roll the dice, then your chances are better with a 3 answer choice question, no doubt about it. But human beings, I don't really think guess at random very often. They have we work with partial information. Oh, I can eliminate that one based on something that I know. But that's true. That is true with the 3 choices. So each question should ask a single, complete, and well-focused question, and not ask 2 things at once or be unfocused. Here's a flawed question here with an unfocused STEM. The popular 4-level training evaluation model, and then you can see the keyed answer there. So if I'm just covering up the answer choices, it's kind of hard to tell when I'm being asked here. The popular 4-level evaluation model, training evaluation model. I know it's going to be something about that, but I don't know too much. Then when you look at the choices, you can pick out Donald Kirkpatrick. So can you tell what this question is asking by reading only the STEM? Well, generally, it's going to be about Kirkpatrick's model, but beyond that, hard to know. If it's a good STEM, as it says on that second point there, knowledgeable learner can determine what the STEM is asking to formulate an answer without looking at the options. And we probably all had that experience. You read a STEM, you think, oh yeah, that's Kirkpatrick, and you go down and find it. Ah, yes, there it is. So yes, a knowledgeable learner will be able to tell what the answer is. And like I'm just saying, try when you're writing and reviewing, try covering the options so that only the stem is visible. And can you guess what will come next? Here's an improved example. Excuse me. Who first proposed the 4-level training evaluation model? So now we got who in there. We know it's going to be a person. We know who proposed it. And it's just a little clearer and sharper than the other version. So this is a preferred version of that. So we do a little better job of focusing the learner's thinking. And we only want to test in one area, limited scope, not try to include too much in one question. Double-barreled, some of you probably heard of that expression, asking two things at once, and only giving the test taker one answer to indicate. And so we want to avoid those as well. I don't think I have an example of double-barreled in here, but here's an example of another example of an unfocused STEM. Best practice for Zoom is to start the meeting on time. Just to cover the answer choices again, say a best practice for Zoom is to, that's pretty broad. There's probably a bunch of best practices for Zoom, and so it's not getting us a really nice, appointed, well-focused question there. We just know it's going to be something about Zoom. And then the improved example, a best practice in running a Zoom meeting is to start the meeting on time. So there's other things, we're talking about it now. I know I'm being asked about a Zoom meeting, and the other things, post a link on social media, post a link on your website. That's posting links. That doesn't apply to the Zoom meeting. Just answer choice A really addresses that. Okay, now we move on. Another aspect of the STEM, extraneous information. And here we've got an example with some extraneous information. I'll just read it real quick. The measures of two angles of a triangle are 35 and 45 degrees. The sum of the length of the two sides of a triangle is greater than the length of the third side. What is the measure of the third angle of the triangle? And the key answer there is 100 degrees. This example has some extra verbiage that has nothing to do with the question and what is needed to answer. What do you think the extraneous information might be here?
Yeah, if you have a good answer, you can type it in the chat.
Well, now you can kind of see the improved example, missing that middle sentence about
some comment.
Yeah. Measures the two angles of triangle 35 and 45. What is the measure of the third angle of the triangle? And this is a somewhat simplistic example, I guess, because I wanted to make it clear. But you know, we probably all in our test-taking careers had questions that you read through and then you realize after you've been thinking about it, this, I think I'm pretty sure the answer, but this part of the question stem doesn't really address that at all. It's not telling me information I need to know. It's not directing me to a theory or an application. And so this is a good thing to keep in mind. Some folks might think, well, I want to make it harder by including some extra information, but there's a lot of ways to make questions harder without sort of, you know, making them tricky by having extra information that doesn't have a bearing on the issue at hand.
That was one of the comments we have in the chat is that an answer like that feels like a trick question because of the extraneous information. Yeah,
it does. And then you're instead of asking, tapping their knowledge or expertise, they're having to do kind of a logic thing to say, well, what really belongs here? This information is extraneous, and then ignore that, and then go answer the question. I don't know. It just is better to avoid that if possible.
Jim, do you think people do that because they really don't maybe understand how to actually write the stem, and then, as you said, they want to make it harder?
I think it happens. Sure. Let's throw that in there and then see if they can still get it right. I mean, I think it happens. I think it does. Okay, moving on. Fact patterns. Kind of alluded to this earlier. Easy way to get high order thinking skills is fact pattern or a little scenario or something. It's going to be a little bit longer, like I was saying, and most closely replicate the kind of information a team member must process to solve problems. I like that part. I like that one especially because you can kind of put a question, a problem in the context of what work that the people are really going to do. If they're really going to be on this team and such happens, here are the details. Here's how to proceed and the answer choices to go with that. So it does take longer to write, but you can give someone a setting, in the scenario that really lets them show you if they understand it and can apply it in a work relevant setting. Okay, negatively phrased. And a slide or two, we're going to get to not, the question stem that says, which of the following is not one of Kirkpatrick's stages or something? But let's go through this real quick. Some writers feel it's easier to construct negatively phrased questions. And I think the reason for that is that with a negatively phrased question, or not question as I like to call them, they can put in 3 true things and 1 bogus answer. So they can kind of seemingly cover a couple of different competencies with this one question and then throw in 1 bogus answer. Possible wrong answers are easy to compose. Looking for an exception. Most negatively phrased questions are not measuring the intended object of the question. And this is an important one, I think, too. May confuse non-native English speakers. And again, that was, there's been research done on negatively phrased questions and shown that it does create some problems, and including non-native English speakers. So, and tends to decrease score validity. So they're kind of hard to defend. Should you never have a not question? I wouldn't say that, but keep it to a minimum, or really make a good case for having such a question. If it really makes sense, it's really defensible. Because very often it's not. It's just an easy way you can include the 3 true things, 1 false one, and an easy way to sort of say you're covering the 3 true things in your blueprint, and then having the test taker just identify the wrong one. There's a couple more points coming on this too. Here's an example. Which of the following is not part of Bloom's original cognitive taxonomy? Got the key answer there, production. So I think we've got another slide that gets more into this. But
before you go on, we've got some comments in the chat that relate to what you're saying. And one was that it's kind of lazy writing because it doesn't help discriminate.
I absolutely agree with that. I wasn't going to make it that strong, but I cannot disagree with that, because it's a lazy in the sense of, I need to talk about this and this and this. I'll throw them into a not question and put in 1 bogus answer, and so I've covered, taken an easier way to cover a couple of different things, but not really done that good of a job of it. So, yeah. Here's a little parsing of this not question. Some learners could get the correct answer because they know that option C is not part of Bloom's taxonomy. Thus, learners who aren't sure that options A, B, and D are part of the taxonomy could get the answer correct if they clearly understood that C was not part of the taxonomy. And that's a point worth saying a few more things on. It's not questions like pick the bogus answer. So picking the bogus answer doesn't necessarily mean that you know the correct answers. It just means you can figure out, I really don't think that's right at all. These other ones I'm not sure about. That one's definitely wrong. So you can pick that answer, you can get a point, and maybe not really demonstrate that much knowledge. So yeah, it's one of the drawbacks to this type of format.
Does the questions, all of the above or none of the above, do they fall into negatively phrased, or are they part of a sort of a different area?
Different problem. I did a little quick research when I was at PricewaterhouseCoopers on all of the above, and I forget what I was looking at Item Bank. It was a non-trivial number of questions that checked probably 75 or 100 questions, and took note of when all of the above was one of the answer choices, how often was it the keyed or correct answer? And it was over 80%. Over 80% of the time, all of the above was the keyed answer. Well, we live in a world with test-savvy folks. A lot of them know that, and so they see all of the above, they're probably going to pick it. So that's one of the drawbacks to all of the above. And none of the above has some other issues as well. But that's answer choices. We're focusing more on stems today, but just to say that all of the above tends to be the key, and people tend to figure that out. Here's an improved example, negatively phrased. If students were to make judgments based on specific standards and criteria, which level of Bloom's original cognitive taxonomy is being exhibited? Knowledge, application, evaluation, since the key there is evaluation. So really more, I think more, with a little bit greater precision, pointing to evaluation by talking about specific standards and criteria. They'd have to know that in order to be able to pick the evaluation choice there. Here's another example of a negatively phrased question. When running a meeting using Zoom, which of the following should you not do? And there's some choices there. Start the meeting on time, post a link on social media, end the meeting on time, keep the meeting moving. And of course, the answer choice is B, post the link on social media. We all know about Zoom bombing now, I guess. So good to know that one. Here's an improved example. When running a meeting using Zoom, which of the following could allow another person to Zoom bomb the meeting? And then our answer choice is the same ones. So there we ask a more direct question about, Zoom bombing and links and so forth. A little bit more direct than the not version, I think. And that's my last slide. I've got some resources. Jeff, you were going to post these somewhere that folks can get to it if they want to. These are three good articles that go into the things that we talked about just now. And my favorite is the Haladania, Downing, and Rodriguez, the one in the middle there. Review of multiple choice item writing guidelines for classroom assessment, applied measurement, and education. And there, it's very research oriented, very much based on empirical research. It's not just somebody's general practices, but it really is stuff that is based on data and empirical research to back up the claims that they make. They're very good about that.
Now, what was